Hi, I'm Dr. Alicia Rozycki with AROSE eTherapy, and I'm here today to talk about my most recent blog posts, Understanding Trauma, Mouse and Man's Search for Meaning. So why am I talking about Mouse, a book on the Holocaust, so is Man's Search for Meaning, in talking about topics related to psychotherapy? In both books, they're obviously talking about traumatic experiences that the people in these biographical and autobiographical accounts experienced. And so, although the experience of trauma with the Holocaust is unique to those victims, we can still learn a lot. We can still learn a lot about trauma from exploring these experiences. So, Mouse has been big talk in the press here lately since a Tennessee school board voted to ban the book. I read an article that captured elements of the transcript from that school board meeting, and it was interesting. I'm not sure if it was accidental or deliberate or what have you, but they not only banned the book, but they banned it on National Holocaust Remembrance Day here in the U.S. So if you are unfamiliar with Mouse or Man's Search for Meaning, I highly recommend both books. They're amazing reads. Mouse is unique. It's like a comic strip form, a graphic novel, award-winning and just amazing. And it's the story of the author and illustrator Art Spiegelman's father, Wladek, and his experience in Poland pre-war, and then as a prisoner in Auschwitz and Dachau. And also tells the story of Art's mother, Anya, who was in the same position as her husband, Wladek. So in Mouse, there's a lot that happens as they tell their story, as Wladek tells his story to his son, about things that happen as the war was unfolding and the Nazis were rising to power. And so there were a great many challenges and difficulties that they experienced even before they got to Auschwitz. A lot of betrayals by people who they thought were going to help them circumvent situations with the Nazis, including family members. And so just very difficult circumstances before the war, or in the buildup of the war, and before being in the camps, and then of course during. And you see in the story of Mouse how that trauma affected both his parents until their death. In fact, his mother, Anya, committed suicide in the late 60s. And, his father survived her, but, he continued to struggle with behaviors that he developed to adapt to his circumstances during the war and during his time in the camps. So you see him hoarding things and being really worried about, money and resources, because, this is what he needed to survive those times, is, actual things and food and money for bribes and whatnot. And what you see in Mouse is also the intergenerational trauma that can occur. And you see how Art's relationship with his parents was really strained because of what they went through. So it's tough to see the negative impact of the trauma. And in Man's Search for Meaning, even though the author of that book, Dr. Viktor Frankl, was at the exact same camps, pretty much, for what I can gather, at the same time as Spiegelman's father, there's a very different outcome for Dr. Frankl. So he was a psychiatrist in Austria pre-war, and is Jewish and also sent to the camps. And he seems to really thrive in his life post-war. He continued his work, did a lot of publishing and kind of sharing information about his experiences there and how to survive such horrific circumstances in life, like being in camps and other scenarios. Like he works with people who are maybe quadriplegics, for example. How do you survive these horrific experiences in life and still thrive? And so he talks about this in his book. So this is a book I frequently have recommended to patients I work with, and I've used it in a course I taught once. I signed it. Just an amazing, amazing book. And so part of why I was kind of comparing and contrasting these books is to show, you have two people who went through the same trauma and yet had very different outcomes. And I think there were a lot of variables at play for why that happened. And I want to emphasize the point that just because someone developed a kind of more negative traumatic response doesn't mean there's something wrong with them. These are very difficult circumstances. I think really what we're learning from Frankl is, how do you get through those traumas more successfully or with greater tools, with tools to help you through that. Frankl himself has this quote from Man's Search for Meaning: "An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior." So again, just underscoring that point that just because you develop depression, anxiety, and other symptoms in response to trauma doesn't mean there's necessarily anything wrong with you. It's your response to those horrific experiences. But so with Frankl, he outlines a few key protective factors, I'd say we'd call them, in response to trauma. And so that could include love. Maybe that sounds, I don't know, almost frivolous, but it's not. He really talks about how thinking of his wife, even though she didn't survive, situation in the Holocaust, thinking of her, longing for her, wishing to be with her again, remembering her, that love, really helped him survive a difficult circumstance. So connecting with those feelings of love that we have with people in our lives can be really inspiring for us. He talks about the concept of inner life, turning within as we are faced with life's challenges, using our imagination, finding some kind of solace in things that we find beautiful and inspiring in the world. This is very important to kind of turn within. Of course, in the camps, he could not turn to external things. Everything around him in a concentration camp was miserable and horrible, really, for the most part. Minus maybe every now and again, he said that they would kind of gather, he and the other inmates, and sing songs. But, for the most part, he had to turn within. There was nothing external to turn to. So he had to rely on his inner life. Humor. At times, he would use humor and a lightheartedness as best he could. Could you imagine using humor in a concentration camp? But he did, and that was part of what helped him survive. Finding meaning in things. This is obviously the main thesis of his book. It's in the title. He's emphasizing the need to find meaning in our experiences in life, including our suffering. Finding meaning in suffering is one of the things that really helps us to make sense of the suffering and persevere through that. He identifies 3 key ways we can find meaning. That is, 1, to create a work or deed, to create something, some kind of project, some undertaking. That could be from woodworking to writing a novel and everything in between. Second would be to encounter something or someone. So maybe you meet somebody new and learn about their life experience, or have some kind of novel experience that's inspiring to you. Third would be choosing the attitude that we take toward life suffering. And so he highlights this. This is something within our control. You can't control horrible situations that occur in your life, but you can control how you look at that, how you process it, your perspective, your attitude, and again, the meaning you find in that suffering. And his last strategy is looking to the future, dreaming about what is to come, looking forward to things you have still to develop and experience. And so this is something that really inspired him, dreaming about life after he gets released from the camps. And remember, at that time, they didn't know when the war was going to end. So, required a lot of imagination to strive for that end date. So, I talk in more detail about these concepts and the experiences of the people in both books in my blog. So check that out. Again, so much to be learned from these experiences. And so it's so important that these experiences were documented for us all to learn from. And so check out these books if you haven't. They're wonderful, wonderful books. And again, you can read more on my blog. Thanks for listening. I know this was a long one, but I think this is a really important topic. Take care.